I hear this complaint literally every single day. And I mean, I feel it myself too. My schedule is packed every day from morning to night, so why does it feel like I'm still not making any actual progress?
Oh, yeah. It's like we've been culturally conditioned to just equate perpetual motion with actual value.
Right. If you aren't doing something, you're falling behind.
Exactly. But today we're actually pulling apart a stack of sources that completely flips that idea on its head.
Yeah, and the mission of this deep dive is kind of wild, honestly. We are challenging that modern obsession with constant doing. We're going to look at the dialectical relationship between what we call useful and what we just dismiss as completely useless.
And the sources we have for this are just a fascinating blend. I mean, we're talking 2,500-year-old Chinese
The
philosophy.
Tao Te Ching and the Zhuangzi, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we're combining that with a massive decade-long modern study on corporate governance, plus some really cutting-edge frameworks in systems ecology.
Which sounds like a huge leap, I know. Ancient poetry and corporate carbon emissions.
It does sound like a stretch, but the common denominator is this really radical shift in how we perceive empty space.
Because right now, we treat blank space on our calendars as just, well, like a terrifying void.
Right. A void that you have to fill immediately with, like a task or a meeting. But what the data and the philosophy are arguing is that leaving blank space is not a luxury, and it's definitely not laziness.
So what is it?
It's actually the highest, most sophisticated form of efficiency.
Okay, that is a bold claim.
It is. But this ancient wisdom is actually being used right now to solve incredibly complex modern crises. Everything from middle management burnout to global climate change.
Okay, but I feel like there's a barrier to entry here for most of us, because to understand why a packed, color-coded schedule doesn't mean progress, we have to kind of fundamentally redefine what makes something useful.
Yes, we have to go back to the absolute foundation.
Right, which takes us to Chapter 11 of the Tao Te Ching, because this chapter just completely dismantles our structural understanding of utility.
It really forces you to look past all the material stuff we spend our lives accumulating. Laozi uses 3 really grounded physical examples to prove we have this upside down.
Okay, let's unpack these. The first one is the wheel, right?
Yeah. So think about the engineering of a classic wooden cartwheel. You have 30 solid spokes, and they all converge on a single hub in the center.
Right, so you have the wood, it's tangible, heavy, meticulously carved.
Exactly. But the wheel cannot function based on just the wood alone.
What do you mean? It's a wooden wheel.
Well, what actually allows the wheel to turn? What moves the cart forward? It's the empty hole in the center of the hub where the axle goes.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because if the hub is just a solid block of wood, you can't put an axle through it.
Right. The wheel can't spin. It's just a stationary, heavy piece of timber at that point.
That makes a lot of sense. So the emptiness makes it a wheel. What's the second example?
So he scales it down to something you'd hold in your hand, a vessel, like a clay bowl or a cup. A potter takes wet clay, spins it, molds the walls, and fires it to create this solid form. And we look at it and admire the clay, the glaze, the shape.
Sure, you're looking at the object itself.
But the clay itself doesn't actually hold the water or the soup. The functional part of that bowl is the empty space contained inside those clay walls.
Without the empty space, it's just a lump of clay.
Exactly. And the third example takes that same logic and applies it to architecture, to human spaces.
The house?
Right. You can spend months laying bricks, putting up walls, building a solid roof.
But to make it a livable room, you have to literally destroy parts of those walls.
Yes, you have to cut out doors and windows. The physical walls define the boundaries, but the sheer emptiness within the walls is what makes it a room you can actually inhabit.
Okay, so looking at the wheel, the bowl, and the house, what is the text actually trying to tell us about utility?
It's drawing a very specific line between 2 concepts. On one side, you have the material structure, the wood, the clay, the bricks, the stuff. And the text calls this material foundation the advantage, or lin. It provides the necessary framework.
Okay, lin is the advantage.
Right. But on the other side, you have the emptiness. And the text defines this emptiness as the actual utility, or yang.
So the material is just the prerequisite. The emptiness is the actual function.
Precisely.
But wait, let me push back on this a little bit, because if I take this literally, it sounds like an excuse to just completely tap out.
How do you mean?
Like if I just clear my calendar, cancel all my meetings, and leave pure empty space, my projects are going to collapse. My company goes bankrupt.
Well, sure.
I mean, I still need the clay, right? The revenue, the deliverables, the actual labor. You can't just champion pure empty space.
And that is the crucial tension here. The philosophy isn't arguing that the clay or the wood is bad, or that action itself is unnecessary.
Right. You still need walls to have a room.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
can't have a bowl without play walls to hold the emptiness.
Oh.
The point is about our imbalance of attention.
Ah, we focus too much on the clay.
We pour 100% of our energy into building thicker, heavier walls, taking on more tasks, buying more things, packing our schedules.
While completely neglecting to protect the internal volume, the emptiness that makes those tasks actually purposeful.
Okay, I see. It's a ratio problem. You know, it actually reminds me of what happens to a smartphone.
Oh, that's a great analogy. How so?
Well, you can go out and buy this flagship device, right? The most expensive hardware, the fastest processor, a titanium frame.
A physical material. The logic.
Exactly, the advantage. But if your storage is 100% full, like if you have literally 0 empty megabytes left on your hard drive, the phone becomes entirely useless.
Because it can't process anything new.
Right. You can't open an email, you can't snap a photo, the whole operating system just freezes.
Mm.
And I feel like my daily schedule is often that maxed out hard drive.
I think a lot of people feel that way.
I've built all the solid material, but without any empty space in the system, the apps of my life just can't run. The whole mechanism crashes.
And we experience that crash as burnout.
We look at an empty hour in our afternoon not as crucial processing capacity. We see it as a void that represents a failure of productivity.
But we rush to fill it with some low-priority task just to feel the physical sensation of moving.
Exactly. Which brings us to a really massive practical leap. Because it's easy to see why a clay pot needs a physical hole in it.
Right, but I am not a clay pot.
You are not. So how does this physical architecture of emptiness translate to, your actual behavior on a Tuesday?
Right. How do we apply emptiness to human action?
This is where we run into one of the most famously misunderstood concepts in Taoist philosophy,
Wu Wei.
Wu Wei, which is usually translated as what, non-action?
Yeah, non-action or doing nothing.
Mm.
And in our hyper-productive modern culture, non-action sounds like, well, a polite synonym for apathy.
It sounds like giving up.
Right. But a far more accurate translation would be non-coercive action or frictionless action.
Oh, that's really different. So it's not the absence of action, it's a specific quality of action. Yes. And Wu Wei operates alongside another concept called ziran, which translates to self-sewing, or moving in harmony with the natural rhythm of your environment.
Okay, how does that look in practice?
Well, the texts rely heavily on agriculture to explain this. So think about a farmer.
Okay.
A farmer wants a massive crop yield, but a successful farmer doesn't achieve that by working 24 hours a day, sprinting through the fields under the moonlight in the dead of winter.
No, obviously not.
They sow in the spring, cultivate in the summer, harvest in the autumn, and then, crucially, they leave the fields empty in the winter.
They let the earth rest.
They allow the earth to rest, and they allow their own bodies to recharge.
Because if that farmer tried to force seeds to grow in frozen winter soil through just sheer willpower, they'd just be exhausting themselves.
Right. They would be engaged in massive amounts of action, but producing zero utility.
That makes total sense.
That is coercive action.
Well,
And to avoid that trap, Zhuangzi introduces the psychological practice called chuameng, which translates beautifully as fasting the mind or sitting in oblivion.
fasting the mind. Wow, that is a really visceral image.
Mm.
I mean, we fast physically to let our digestive system rest, right? Clear out toxins.
Exactly.
But doing that to the human ego seems like a completely different, much harder challenge.
Oh, it requires basically starving the internal noise.
Yeah.
We constantly feed our minds this diet of rigid dichotomies.
Like success versus failure.
Winning versus losing, status versus irrelevance. Fasting the mind is the process of quieting that relentless, calculating intellect.
So how do you actually do that?
So Wangzi describes it as learning to hear with the spirit, not just the ears. It is an internal emptying out.
So you're creating a blank space in your consciousness.
Yes. So you can respond to reality as it's unfolding in front of you instead of reacting blindly out of anxiety or like preconditioned habits.
It's the psychological equivalent of getting your ego out of the way.
Exactly.
And what's really interesting here is how perfectly this maps onto our modern understanding of peak performance.
Oh, like in sports or music?
Yeah, think about an elite athlete, like a basketball player taking a crucial free throw, or a concert pianist playing some wildly complex concerto.
Right.
If that performer is actively thinking about the mechanics of their wrists, if their internal monologue is screaming about the consequences of failure,
They choke.
they choke. because they're trying to force the outcome through sheer intellectual control. Their ego introduces friction into their nervous system.
But when they fast the mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They enter what sports psychologists call the flow state. The action happens through them, completely effortlessly.
That is wu-wei. High-level action, but completely stripped of coercive effort.
It's amazing how universal that is.
It is. And the Huinanzi, which is another foundational text we're looking at, illustrates just how futile it is to ignore this flow state.
What kind of analogy do they use?
It compares coercive action forcing things against their nature to trying to dry up a deep well by throwing fire into it.
Oh, man.
Or trying to engineer a river to flow up a mountain.
Right, because you are fighting the fundamental physics of water and gravity.
Yeah.
I mean, you might build some elaborate pumping system, but you're burning an immense amount of energy just to fight the baseline reality of the environment.
Exactly. True efficiency is recognizing the systemic momentum. You guide the river where the topography naturally wants it to flow.
Leverage the existing kinetic energy rather than constantly depleting your own reserves to fight it.
Exactly.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
If I'm a middle manager listening to this, and my quarterly bonus is explicitly tied to maximizing team output and hitting these really aggressive KPIs.
Yeah, it sounds risky.
Moving with the topography and fasting the mind sounds like a really great way to get fired.
It does.
How does stepping back and embracing non-coercive action survive when we zoom out to the macro level? Like the ruthless, data-driven reality of global corporate structures.
So this is where the synthesis of our sources becomes incredibly compelling. Because the data reveals this isn't just a personal meditation practice for, like, reducing your stress.
It's actually a systemic strategy.
Yes, it functions as a highly effective structural intervention at scale. Our sources include this massive empirical study that analyzed Chinese-listed companies over a 10-year period.
A decade of data on publicly traded companies. What were they even looking for?
They wanted to measure the impact of informal cultural institutions on hard corporate behavior. So they mapped the regional influence of Taoist and Buddhist philosophy based on where these corporations were headquartered.
Wait, they wanted to see if the ambient cultural philosophy of a city affected the company's environmental footprint.
Exactly. And the data showed a distinct, statistically significant correlation. Companies located in areas with a strong historical influence of these philosophies produced dramatically lower corporate carbon emissions.
Wait, really? Let me make sure I understand the mechanics of this.
Sure.
You're not saying a corporate board is sitting down, opening the Tao Te Ching, and consciously deciding to alter their supply chain logistics.
No, not at all.
But the executives operating in these regions just possess this ambient worldview. They see the company not as a machine designed purely to extract value,
Right.
but as an embedded part of a larger ecosystem.
Yes.
And that underlying philosophical software actually bends the empirical data on carbon emissions.
It does. This study concludes that this philosophical background acts as an informal regulatory force.
An informal regulatory force.
Right. It embeds a norm of low-carbon innovation deeply into the culture. Because think about formal government regulations, they force compliance through fear of penalties.
Which is coercive external action.
Exactly. But an informal cultural shift toward interconnectedness creates a natural internal momentum toward corporate social responsibility.
So the empty space of a shared cultural value literally alters the measurable physical output of a multi-million-dollar corporation.
Incredible, right?
It reframes the entire concept of regulation. But let's bring it back inside the building, to the actual day-to-day management of people.
Right. How does a manager implement wu-wei without just, abandoning their team?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the text addresses leadership explicitly. It advocates for a style it calls the teaching that uses no words.
Teaching that uses no words. In a modern office, what does that actually look like?
It looks like psychological safety. The text explicitly warns against a multiplicity of words, which is essentially the ancient equivalent of micromanagement.
The manager who is constantly issuing directives.
Demanding endless status updates, hovering over every minor decision. When a manager does that, they destroy the autonomy of their employees.
Because the team's cognitive space becomes entirely filled with the manager's anxiety.
Yes, they become paralyzed, they become afraid to take risks, and entirely dependent on top-down instructions.
They become the frozen smartphone.
Exactly. The system locks up because the manager has consumed all the operational memory.
So a manager practicing wu-wei would do what instead?
They build the boundaries of the room, they secure the budget, clarify the ultimate goal, provide the tools, and then they step back and leave the empty space.
They allow the employees to actually use their own localized intelligence to solve the problem.
Exactly. And when the project succeeds, the text highlights a really critical leadership behavior. Gongchengbuju.
Gongcheng Buju. What does that translate to?
It means achieving success, but not claiming the credit.
Wow.
The manager refuses to fill the victory with their own ego. By stepping back, the leader acts as the empty hub of the wheel.
Allowing all the individual spokes, the employees, to bear the weight and move the organization forward. That requires an enormous amount of ego suppression.
It really does.
And yet, our sources push this framework even further, right? Scaling it past corporate management all the way up to global survival. Let's talk about that systems ecology paper.
Right, the one introducing the DSSI framework.
The Deep and Shallow Sustainability Intervention Framework.
Yes. So this research looks at how we are attempting to manage existential crises, like global climate change and accelerating biodiversity loss.
It's the big stuff.
And the researchers propose that our current global interventions are entirely too shallow. We treat ecological collapse as an engineering problem.
Like if we just build enough carbon capture machines or invent better solar panels.
Or implement enough geoengineering, we can just force the planet to stabilize.
They're basically trying to out-engineer the consequences of our own engineering.
Exactly. It's coercive action, trying to route the river up the mountain through sheer technological force.
So what does the DSSI framework suggest instead? Because I know it draws heavily on Taoist insights.
It argues that these technical, shallow interventions will fail because they come from the exact same mindset that caused the crisis in the first place.
Right.
To achieve deep sustainability, the paper says we need a fundamental shift in pre-paradigmatic metacognition.
Okay, wait, let me break that phrase down mechanically. Pre-paradigmatic.
Meaning before we even establish a paradigm or a worldview.
So we have to change the foundational assumptions about how we even think about our own thinking.
Yes. It requires a profound civilizational humility. The framework cites the systems thinker Donella Meadows.
Oh, I love her work.
She argued that when you're dealing with incredibly complex, non-linear planetary systems, humanity must let go into not knowing. We have to remove our human-centric arrogance.
It's kind of like trying to cure a severe fever by throwing a patient into an ice bath.
That's a great way to look at it.
You are attacking the metric, the high temperature, with this aggressive, shallow intervention. But you aren't listening to the underlying system. The body is deliberately raising its temperature to kill off a pathogen.
Right. You're fighting the body's immune response.
And the DSSI framework is basically suggesting we need the humility to stop throwing ice at the planet and start understanding the immune response of the biosphere.
That is a perfect analogy. Letting go into not knowing is the ultimate expression of fasting the mind on a global scale.
We have to empty ourselves of this hubris that says humanity can just endlessly manipulate the Earth's feedback loops without consequence.
Yes. We must align our civilization's momentum with the natural carrying capacity of the planet, rather than just continuously forcing this coercive, extractive action.
The through line connecting all of these sources is genuinely staggering.
It really is.
I mean, we started with a physical hole and a wooden cartwheel. We moved through the ambient cultural drivers of corporate carbon emissions and ended up on the ontological shifts required to survive ecological collapse.
And yet the mechanism of action remains exactly the same at every level.
Exactly. Whether you're a policymaker drafting global climate accords, a director trying to cultivate an innovative team, or just an individual staring at a completely booked Tuesday calendar.
Right.
Reacting to complexity by throwing more aggressive action, more micromanagement, and more control of the problem is actively making it worse. We've been so deeply conditioned to fear the void.
We really have.
But leaving blank space unstructured time, moments of quiet observation, just stepping back from the urge to intervene is not an abdication of duty. That blank space is the functional architecture where growth, resilience, and true efficiency actually happen.
To really anchor that idea, I want to leave you with a final thought. It's drawn from another story by Zhuangzi regarding the paradox of the useless tree, or Wu Yang Zhiyang.
The useless tree. Okay, let's hear it.
So the story follows a carpenter walking through a forest, and he spots this ancient, sprawling, absolutely massive tree. But the carpenter walks right past it. He dismisses it as completely worthless.
Why?
He points out that the trunk is gnarled, the branches are wildly twisted, and the wood grain is just completely irregular. He says if you tried to build a boat with it, the boat would sink.
Oh,
If you tried to build furniture, it would warp and rot. It is completely useless to human industry.
it has absolutely no utility for a production line.
None. Now, think about a tree in the forest that grows perfectly straight and tall. It demonstrates obvious, immediate utility.
Right, so it gets chopped down in its prime to become floorboards or support beams.
Exactly. Its life is terminated by its own usefulness. But this twisted, useless tree, it was entirely uncommodifiable. Because no one could figure out how to extract value from it, it was left completely alone.
Uh-huh.
And precisely because it was left alone in the empty space of unproductivity, it survived for centuries. It grew to a monumental size, and its sprawling, useless branches eventually provided shade, sanctuary, and rest for thousands of travelers and animals.
Wow.
Its uselessness was the very mechanism that allowed it to achieve a profound and enduring greatness. And that narrative poses a deeply challenging question to a modern listener.
Which is?
In a society that relentlessly demands visible, measurable productivity from every single minute of your life, what part of yourself could become infinitely more resilient, protective, and enduring if you simply gave yourself permission to let it be completely useless?
Man, that strips away the guilt we feel when we look at our own downtime, doesn't it?
It does.
We crave the solid clay of a checked-off task list, the visible proof of our labor. But sometimes the most powerful and effective thing you can cultivate isn't the task itself. It is the empty space you preserve around it.
Absolutely.
So think about your day. The next time you try to schedule a high-intensity focus block right over your lunch hour, just to catch up on emails, take a breath, protect the emptiness. Let that hour be entirely useless. We will catch you on the next deep dive.